Hello, everybody. Welcome to Introduction to Logic. This is the first lecture of the semester. We're going to be talking a little bit about critical thinking and really using critical thinking to develop your skills in logic and how logic applies to thinking critically. So when we think of critical thinking, it requires learning how to think rather than simply what to think. This class is going to be a little bit different than most other classes that you've taken in the past. We are going to be looking at arguments. We are going to be looking at how to deduce certain propositions from other propositions. We're going to be looking at different types of logic, whether it's inductive logic or deductive logic, different fallacies, and ways in which we can really make sense of the things that we hear. And this is good because we can gain confidence from this, knowing that what we say makes sense. And it's also good to be able to evaluate this type of stuff, to evaluate what other people say, because then we can feel confident knowing what they're saying makes sense or that it doesn't make sense. So using the skills of logic, we will be able to listen to or read something and know whether or not it makes sense on a logical level. And so it's really important that we use our critical thinking skills and we're really learning the right way to think. And so logic is going to be the main focus of this class, particularly symbolic logic when we look at truth tables, when we look at given proofs. And logic is really the study of methods and principles used to distinguish good and bad arguments. And an argument is basically just an assertion made by someone that is then defended with reasons, or an assertion made by you that is defended by reasons. And we'll get into that later in the semester. But essentially, it's the art of being able to determine good and bad arguments, determining whether something makes sense or doesn't make sense. And so this is going to be very helpful when it comes to most aspects of your life because, right, we make these types of claims, we make claims about things about the state of affairs of the world, politics, economics, religion, everything. And it's important that when we make these claims and then justify why we think those things are true, that we're defending them with reasons. And this is where we get a distinction between logic and just basically opinions, right? Opinions are basically beliefs that are based solely on your feelings rather than really reasons and facts, while logic is based on justification of good scientific reasonings and facts. And so you're entitled to your opinions, but at the same time, be aware that your opinions are governed more so by feelings rather than good, rational, logical justification. And that's what we're after because we want to make sure that we are making sense of the world, that we understand that our thoughts and that our beliefs are things that are supported and justified. That way we can feel confident knowing that they are right, they make sense, they are what the information points to. And so as we move through the rest of this lecture, just be aware these are some skills that you're going to be picking up, some skills that hopefully you will develop throughout this course. Good characteristics of a critical thinker, right? Someone who's good at being logical is obviously your analytical skills, right? Being able to analyze logical material, which is what we are going to be doing in this class. And then also communication, your ability to research information. Research comes in handy when you're trying to find justification for certain claims or beliefs that you're making. And then flexibility, right? Being able to understand that if new information points to a different position, to a different assertion, then we can take on that information and then kind of recalibrate or recalculate what our understanding of a certain situation is. This is good. We don't want to take in new information and take in new information that might be contradictory to the information that we already believe and then dig our heels in and just still hold on to perhaps a false belief, right? We want to go where the information is leading us. We want to follow the rules of logic and be rational, analytic creatures. And so this requires a good deal of open-mindedness, a good deal of flexibility and tolerance. And it'll allow you to be a better problem solver because you can go with the flow of the information. You can see where the information points, where the justification leads. Um, it allows you to be mindful and also collaborative by taking in other beliefs, taking in other propositions and assertions. And you are working as a team with other people. When we think of arguments, and we'll talk about this later, when we think of arguments, we don't want to think of them necessarily as like that back and forth bickering. We want to think of that as a kind of collaborative effort to try and continually gain information to understand a higher level of understanding whatever it is that we're talking about. And so it's important that we develop these skills throughout the semester, that we kind of hone in to these skills, because the better we can be at critical thinking, the more logical we can be, the more rational we can be, the more confidence you're going to have, the more you will be able to present yourself in a clear way and help be persuasive and convincing versus just kind of blowing up on somebody or expressing position with no justification or no reasoning. And again, it allows you to know whether or not someone's making sense or not making sense, and give you the confidence of knowing what to decide or how to really think for yourself. Now, as we go through, you will notice that there are some barriers to becoming a good critical thinker. And some of them include just irrationality, narrow-mindedness. These are a few. Resistance to taking in new information, to being flexible or tolerant. These are also barriers for good, effective critical thinking. And so different types of resistance that you may come in contact with are avoidance, really trying to distance yourself from information that is contradictory, or distance yourself from information that goes against maybe what you believe. Perhaps anger, if somebody takes a different position than you or asserts a position that you adamantly disagree with, you might become a bit angry. You might get into denial and feel like you just won't believe the information, or you just won't believe the justification. And again, these are barriers to our ability to be flexible, to take in new information, to work collaboratively, and hinder our ability to be critical thinkers and really use logic to our advantage. Other types of resistance, just pure ignorance, not doing the proper research needed in order to really gain an understanding of justifications. Certain distractions, conformity, right? These are all barriers that prevent us from really digging our heels into kind of logically determining whether or not something makes sense or doesn't make sense. Narrow-mindedness, again, is another barrier. A kind of fear of being challenged, refusal to take on new information, kind of a either or, all or nothing absolutism type of thinking, or egocentrist type of thinking will prohibit you from really branching out and opening your mind to new ideas and new possibilities, which is something that you're really going to need in this class. A lot of the stuff that we're going to be talking about is going to, at first, sound very awkward. It's going to sound as though it doesn't really make sense. It's going to sound very irrational, but the more we think about it, the more kind of open-minded we become, the more you'll see that some of the things that we're talking about make the most sense, right? Because it's the logical way of thinking about things. And as well, you run into narrow-minded thinking when we think of the world in a kind of ethnocentric or anthropocentric way. And we need to really kind of distance ourselves from that sort of thinking to really keep a clear and open mind. Also, trying to rationalize a position against information, against justification is a real barrier that is problematic. We don't want to continually try and justify a position that seems as though is making less and less sense the more information we take in. Rationalizing involves kind of ignoring competing claims. Uh, and that's something that we don't want to do. We want to take on competing claims. We want to make sure that we're listening with an open mind to ideas and assertions that are perhaps damaging or contradictory to our beliefs in order to get the best information possible and make the best decision of whether or not something makes sense or it doesn't make sense. We also see a barrier with cognitive and social dissonance. Really just the idea that modifying or critically analyzing our views kind of encounter this cognitive or social dissonance where we seem to contradict our own worldview, right? When we have ideas or we take in social behavior that contradicts or conflicts with our worldviews, we're likely to disregard this information or not keep an open mind. But we need to make sure that we're doing the opposite, right? We want to make sure that we're taking in all new information and then looking at it for whether or not it rationally fits, whether or not there is some sort of logical pattern, all stuff that we're going to be talking about later on in this semester. Lastly, it's just important that throughout this class, you're remembering these certain characteristics, these traits of good critical thinking, because they are going to be something that doesn't just help you with this course, but helps you in the future for the rest of your life. While some other classes are going to be helpful when you do that particular thing, logic and critical thinking is going to be important for the rest of your life. Anytime that you're communicating with friends or family, anytime that you're working at your job, you are determining whether or not something makes sense or doesn't make sense. You are determining whether or not the things that you believe are right or wrong, what seems to justify what. This is going to be a constant battle for the rest of your life. So it's important that we take this seriously and we really try to make sure that we're becoming the best logicians we can, to be the best critical thinkers we can, and really focusing on developing our way of thinking.